Welcome to Metaphysical Files of True Crime. This is Brittany Larson.
And Joanna.
And we are talking about Richard Ramirez today.
The Night Stalker.
Oh, God.
Yes.
I'm a little bit, it's so funny. Like, I was actually more scared to go into Jeffrey Dahmer. And then when I read a little bit about Richard Ramirez, I was like, oh, God, he's so violent. He's so gruesome. But now, after reading what I read and already having some conversation with Richard Ramirez, I'm not at all even remotely scared.
Well, it's funny you say that because last night after reading a lot of his crimes, I went around closing windows and double checking door locks just to make sure because, he would break into people's homes and commit these crimes. And it was just like, let me just go check the door one more time.
Yeah, that would make anyone do that after reading the information that you've read. So do you want to take us off with a little bit of a summary of Richard Ramirez before we get into the energy and what we have discovered about him?
Sure. So Richard Ramirez was an American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who was active between 1984 and 1985, so 1 year. He was also known as the Night Stalker, and his crimes took place in California, random acts of crime. He was convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 SAs, and 14 burglaries. He was also captured by citizens in California after he had seen his face on a newspaper in a convenience store and got scared and tried to leave. And then people had recognized him because his face was everywhere at that point, which is very interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, couple of things. First off, I have called in Richard Ramirez energy, and I want to stress, from the medium side of this, when we're talking about holistic, practices and techniques and things like that, I'm starting with the energy level that he was at when he passed away. So what his energy signature was, what his consciousness was. And then I'm also going to be looking more into what I would call more the higher level astral plane, which would be also the ancestral realms. So I'll be looking at him from the more evolved state. But for those of you that are, into energy, that's what we're going to be doing, is kind of pulling a little bit from two different versions of him, the side of him before he evolved and then the side of him that he was after. However, I will just say, reading the information, probably I would say towards the capture part.
Yes.
I started hearing the phrase going postal. And for those of you that don't know, the phrase going postal was coined after a 1986 massacre shooting that happened at a post office. I believe that was in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I love that. Well, I shouldn't say I love this part, but I think it's so interesting because Richard Ramirez was very aware of the violence that was going on even when he was sitting in jail. He was captured in 1985,
yes.
August of 1985.
Yes.
And that the going postal stuff didn't happen until 1986. But then after 1986, there was a string of massacres at post offices that then started happening. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting because I feel like Richard Ramirez, number one, immediately was bringing up the fact that, look at, it wasn't just me, being violent. It's look at all of the stuff that happened even after I was in jail. It wouldn't matter. Yeah, and I feel like there's something to that energy. And I just thought that was so interesting that I heard the phrase going postal, which it made me laugh. I was just first off, I immediately went to the Google machine because I wanted to know immediately, was this before or after he was captured? What's the relevance? But I can see now where he's getting at, he has this nonchalant energy about violence, kind of shrugging it off.
Yeah.
And it's very like, I guess you could say no regard for life.
Yeah, he was very reckless, very chaotic. He was known to say that there was violence already in the world, that he was just, it wasn't really him being violent, but there's violence already. So he didn't have any regard to really, or any remorse to what he had done to any of his victims.
Right. And so with that said, energetically, first off, when I called him in, I immediately got a kind of like a shrugging off of energy. He kind of has that drifter vibe. Jeans kind of torn, boots. He's got boots on, and he's kind of like that. I don't know, the kid in school that's that teenage angst.
Yeah, he was
the rebellious guy, and he's like sitting in the back of the room, and he's got his hair's greasy, and he's just like, I do whatever I want when I want, and no one can tell me what to do.
Yeah, he has this cult following. He was in the media. He had this really cult following of being this gaunt kind of pop star look about him. He was into like heavy metal, and he just had that look about him. And then he actually had this cult following based on how he looked and his attitude of being like, F everything. This is me. No remorse for what he did. Kind of like, I'm going to do what I want.
I just naturally had to look at a picture of him, which it makes sense. He's got that vibe. It's like that vibe that's like, what is that? 16 Candles? Is that the?
Yeah.
It's like that kind of like, bad boy, I'm going to do what I want, but it's like attractive because he's so like in his element of.
It's kind of like the Breakfast Club. The kid from the Breakfast Club who had the boots on, who was very like, F everybody, I'm going to be myself. I don't care if anyone likes me. I'm just going to hate everybody. And, everyone's going to love me because I hate everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think isn't that applying there's certain universal laws that are being applied there, because you have to be in the likeness of the energy to attract in energy, right? But then you also can't really like be attached to the outcome of it. Like if you're obsessing over becoming that thing, like if you're obsessed with money, you push it away from you more and more and more.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, like the more that he was like, I don't give a fuck, I don't care, it was like naturally attracting in the attention. And there's an air about not caring because it makes you more attractive. Yeah. And so I think in some ways, and I hate that I'm romanticizing such a gruesome experience that was had, but I just think it's significant to note that, the way that society has, and something I noticed even when I was reading the material about Richard Ramirez, it was aggravating because I feel like every little thing about his childhood all the way up to his adult life was literally construed to talk about how it made him a monster. And I feel like people were trying to explain away his actions by saying, well, look he had this trauma. Well, he had that trauma. He had a lot of rejection trauma, and he had rejection wounds, which made him withdrawn from, like connection in different ways, but not like it's such a marked difference from like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
Where Jeffrey Dahmer was like, don't leave me. I don't want to be left. I'm so afraid. And like, I'm going to recluse and I'm going to hide away. And it made me weird versus like Richard Ramirez, who's like, punk ass, fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be up in your face. And like, you're going to see me.
And he got the thrill of that, doing that to people. He got the thrill of taunting his victims, of belittling them. But
I felt like he we were standing in the kitchen and we were kind of like looking at some of the information before we got in this podcast, and noticed the stance I took when I was like talking about his energy. Like I immediately like put my foot up on the chair.
It was like a power move.
Yeah.
And like taking up my space.
Yeah, but in a lot of ways, when I took up that position, it was like wisdom. Like I felt like I had all this wisdom and this understanding, and I was wise beyond my years. Like that's the energy that he gave off. And it's interesting because I feel like it's a completely different perspective from what I originally, I guess, thought
Yeah.
of. And it's weird, you know, because like you would think somebody behaving in this manner was number one, destructive, reckless, a menace to society. He just didn't care.
Well, I feel like, you know, because he was, 24 when he started these crimes. But I feel like he still was like a teenage mentality. Like, I don't feel like, whereas Dahmer was kind of intelligent, and you can tell he was intelligent, with Ramirez, I just feel like he still was stuck in that, like, 18-year-old kind of mindset. Like, he never really fully developed mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there was, I feel like it was even younger because I see like a little 14-year-old self.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like he didn't really grow out of that energy, but he did grow out of the rules and regulations. It's almost like this rebellion against anything of conformity. Kind of reminds me of like growing up in a religious household where it's like, you are allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do this, and you can't wear this and you can't talk like this. And once I left, all I could do was swear. And all I could do is wear the very opposite of what I was told to wear.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like in some ways, you know, he went against society, you know, in the way of like, I'm above the rules. The rules don't apply to me. And I feel like in that way, that is why he behaved the way that he did. He was very opportunistic. He walked around, and in the time period that he was also, you know, around, he like... doors were unlocked.
Yeah.
People left their cars running. Yeah, like there were like, it was like opportunity after opportunity. And instead of him just kind of like scooting by and going, oh, that's an opportunity, he just took that as an opportunity and took it.
Right.
And did it.
Right.
And I feel like he did what like people like, I feel like this generation growing up like in the 70s and 80s, I feel like a lot of kids were coming out of, I think we just talked about this with Jeffrey Dahmer, they were coming out of the experience of what, you know, the society norm was, which was the generations before them who were all like, you know, 1950s, like, you know, like, oh, the dad, you know, is the breadwinner and the mom stays home and takes care of the family. And we don't talk about bad stuff, and we don't talk about the elephants in the room.
Yeah.
And we push them under the rug. And there was a lot of dysfunction, and there was a lot of scapegoats. When I say dysfunctional families, I'm referencing the scapegoat. There's always a scapegoat in the family where they're blamed for everything and why they're not good enough for the rest of the family. And it's usually the kid that doesn't want to do what the family wants to do.
Yeah.
And it's usually because the kid is now acting out in ways like, it's like, well, why? Questioning authority, you know, like starting to go against it. And I feel like that's what really happened with him.
Yeah, because he did have an abusive father, and he started running away because he didn't want to listen. His mom was around. The mom was very religious, Catholic upbringing. She couldn't control him, so he started running away, sleeping in cemeteries. So he did start at a young age kind of rebelling against his family. He was the youngest of 5 too, also. So the baby kind of is always, I feel like, the scapegoat of the family sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
they usually get away with everything because
True.
everyone, not by then, the parents have given up on trying to like create the structure in the family unit that's needed.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about his energy and like, you know, even when he got into satanic worship.
Yeah.
You know, it's so interesting. People get so scared of Satanism in general because they think like, oh my God, like it's so like, you know, like they're talking about like animal sacrifices and like, you know, like rituals that like are like demonic by nature, and it's worshiping demons and, you know, deities, and it's so not right and blah, blah, blah. I think it has a misconception. I feel like Satanism, there's an empowerment that people find with worshiping it. And then also in addition to that, I feel like there's a large amount of people who seek something like, you know, if you think of the construct of religion in general, you know, there's God, and usually God is separate from Jesus Christ. Some people worship Jesus Christ as the Lord, right?
Right.
However, you know, like Jesus being God's son, and then Satan being an angel that rebelled in heaven, and he was cast out from heaven because he was disobedient, and he was this rebellious child of God, and and he's left here on earth, and that's all he's allowed to do. And so there's this misconception about Satanism immediately, because people are like, oh my God, well, that's bad. That's a bad thing. When really, I think people get attracted to that particular, I guess you could say sect, or following, so to speak, because of the fact that they have also been cast out by their family. They've been punished. They've been, kind of shunned in different ways. And so they feel misunderstood. So then they look at something like Satan worship, and it's like, well, actually, it makes more sense because Satan, was misunderstood from a Bible standpoint.
Yeah. And I think he also used it as a shock factor, Ramirez, because, as his victims were dying and a lot of them were praying to God, he would make them swear to Satan. So I think it also had to do with the shock factor of, he was so against going with the norm. I just feel like he just had to feel like he was different. He was making some kind of difference in his life. And he just wanted to make sure that people feared him, I feel like.
Well, see, when you say that, though, I immediately see him shrugging his shoulders, crossing his arms, and shaking his head back and forth like it was not about shock. I didn't give a fuck. And so then I go into what was it actually about?
Yeah.
And I get that he truly felt that there's something about Satan worship that he actually was drawn to, and he did study it. It wasn't the surface. I feel like he wants to be known for his depth that he actually had, rather than how it appeared. It looked as though he was surface level, and he's not surface level.
Yeah, a lot of people thought.
And I'm angry. I'm so angry. I'm angry. Oh, I just got this whiff of anger. Anger, like you don't know me. How dare you talk about me like you know me? That's just instant anger. And that is coming from his energy signature of when he was here on earth.
Yeah.
And in his conscious form here. And there's this anger of no one knows me, no one understands me, almost like I'm a ghost or this invisible being. I could just blend in anywhere and no one would ever freaking recognize me, and I'm just not known. I'm not known. I'm not what's the point of all of it? And it's so interesting. What's the point?
Well, I feel like he was doing this to be known because his case became so pop culture in our society. His trial took 4 years. It was one of the most expensive trials in our history. It was $1.8 million.
Interesting.
4 years it took. People idolized him. People worshipped him. People got tattoos with his name on it. It was he was this person who was the outcast of society, and people could recognize that. But I think a lot of people in the 80s felt like outcasts. He loved heavy metal, and a lot of people at that time were like, heavy metal is Satan worship, and that's why he did what he did, was because he listened to this music, and but he
I feel like he felt misunderstood, though, because I don't think that he really nothing about his energy is giving off that I knew what I was doing from the beginning. It was more like I just really wanted to feel my sense of worth or some sort of power. And I feel like it was worthiness, power, and to have some sort of strength to get through the experience that he had. In his strength, it's so interesting because my ass is why didn't you just go confront your dad? Because that's really what your problem was.
Yeah.
And when I say that, he just drops his head down and doesn't want to talk about that.
Well, and it's funny because even after he got caught, his family still stayed with him. His dad visited him in prison. His dad went to trial. His mom also visited him in prison. They never denounced him as a son, never publicly, they thought that he didn't have a fair trial. They thought that, and I think that as a parent, me being a parent as well, your children can do these heinous acts, but you can still love them. And they're still your child. And I just think that he fought against his parents for so long, and in the end, they were still there.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it's really important that we recognize, that there's like a whole other side to this too, I think, that isn't going to be in books and isn't going to, because we're talking about from his viewpoint in mediumship and things like that, like when we pull his energy in it. And I feel like there's a part of this where he did not confront his inner demons with his dad. And it was his dad, because my left kidney is going off. There's such a father wound there. There's a feeling of not being seen and heard and understood. And I feel like I would have loved to be a fly on the wall to see like his interactions with his dad in prison, because I can guarantee you that made him feel small, made him feel tiny.
It's really interesting.
So getting more into, I guess talking about, at least what I'm picking up, like I just heard, so why are you not more angry about your life? And I started thinking about all of that I've been through up till now, and how disempowered it made me feel. So instead of me feeling more anger and like anger against the world, I internalized that and brought that into myself, and I felt victimized by the world. Not, and that made me recluse inward, and I feel helpless rather than aggression towards others, where I want to take it out on another person.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting take, in that, like, that's just the words I just heard was, and then it brings me to ask you too, you've had a dysfunctional family, and within that, whole experience, why are you not angrier?
I think I, like you, internalized it. And I feel like, I also now, today, I'm just more empathetic towards people. I see like people, and I just kind of like, oh, they had a really hard life. Like, I can empathize with what people go through on a daily basis and as a child. So I just think that we all have our different ways of dealing with things, and we chose a healthier version, maybe not so healthy, but a healthier version than of hurting other people.
Right. Well, and another thing that comes up, and this goes into, I don't think he realized that he was starting a cult following, quote unquote, or he was going to become a pop star from this,
Yeah.
I feel like he literally just was taking opportunity after opportunity, and he didn't care. And he felt that he was above the law, and it gave him a thrill to feel like he was above the law.
Yeah.
And it made him feel like he was actually, doing what he wanted rather than what this society told him he could do and couldn't do. Right. Mm-hmm. We understand, and most people that are going to listen to this understand that, that he, grew up and was exposed to some horrific stuff when he was a kid.
Yes.
Like through his cousin, I believe.
His cousin.
Even killed his own wife in front of, Ramirez.
Yes, at 12.
Yeah. So there's some gruesome stuff that he endured, like in watching that. I mean, and there's a whole energy to watching that experience. But also, I feel like that's not really what made him. I think it's more the relationship between him and his father that set him off.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like, and the reason I say that is because that left kidney is going off like crazy, and I feel like it's very symbolic for the father wound. Mm-hmm. And it makes more sense because the vision that he showed me was standing in some random person's house that he was, quote unquote, staying at, who didn't know that he was there, right? Mm-hmm. And it looks like a basement. I see like wood paneling on the, like the walls. Mm-hmm. And like the carpeting is like kind of like grungy like. And there's like a big box TV with antennas. And then I see like a bookshelf with like some weird, God, like those, in Grandma's house, Grandma used to have like those little figurines that were like stupid little porcelain
like things, like some of like angels or little
but I'm seeing like one in particular, and I can't even put it in words, but it's like weird coloring on it, like it's been like hand painted, and it's not an angel, it's like a some sort of like character of some kind. And it's just sitting there on the bookcase, and the bookcase is like this like glass gold bookcase. It looks like Grandma's house. That's my first thought was, oh, is he at his grandma's house? But then I was like, no, this feels like not him, like nowhere near his family. And like and even the fabric on the couch and everything, it's just old, and like
I wonder if it was like a victim's house that he just kind of stayed in after the crime.
Yes, and I see him standing there with one of his boots half untied, and then the other one tied. And then, his jeans, they've been worn. It doesn't look like they've ever been washed, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And his hair very greasy and messy. And he's standing there and he's looking at the TV, and he's watching the news and his name is not plastered on the news, but what he's doing is plastered on the news. And there's this excitement and this thrill of at least it's the same kind of thrill that I've gotten when I start making headway in social media, where I'm like actually seeing some progress and results, where it's like, wow, I'm making an impact on people's lives, and I feel like it's powerful. He was feeling that from the opposite side of it, where it was like a thrill of like, I'm making an impact. And then what I get from him about making people hail Satan as they were dying, there was a fear, and it makes so much sense, because his whole childhood was Catholic?
Yes.
And so he knows how much fear the devil brings out in people.
Right, especially if they're dying.
And there was something about watching people in fear that was exciting to him. It made him feel like he actually had some power that he didn't have in his own life. And what he really wanted to do, and this is what fascinates me about it, and it was only in the moment that, like, right before people were passing away, that he actually had these moments of like I don't want to call it serenity, but like clarity.
Yeah.
Like wanting people to not be afraid. And that was the big thing. And I almost could venture out to say, if he had come across somebody that he was going to torture or beat that wasn't actually afraid of him, that actually had more power and stood there,
that would have scared him.
That would have freaked him out, because it would have been his father. And he would have he would have played out that role. But I almost get from him a compulsion of playing out, and it's so interesting, because all these serial killers, I'm getting excited. A lot of these serial killers, they have like certain compulsive behaviors that are like the BTK killer. We're going to be talking about him. He compulsively can't help himself. That Clove Hitch movie.
Yes.
Like the guy that, like, what it really, really talked about was the confines of a serial killer, what makes them a serial killer, and how they can never stop. And they have this compulsive behavior. Like the Clove Hitch killer, he literally was obsessed with this one clove hitch knot. He would do it on every one of the houses before he went in and did stuff to the women.
Right.
And he stalked them long before that. And it was like a compulsive, predatory instinct that was activated. And there was no deviation from that energy. And, obviously I don't know about the Clove Hitch killer and what that is based on. Obviously they're drawing on some of the serial killers' information. But there's like a compulsion that a lot of these killers have. And I feel like Ramirez had this compulsion to almost act out how he felt inside about his dad and his experience. And when I say that, him cowering down because of his father's like abuse. And it was like acting it out in reverse form, where he was the father, like, you know, like literally dominating over a person, and then they were in essence shrinking back. Kind of his energy reminds me of John Wayne Gacy's energy, where John Wayne Gacy was literally playing out a childhood wound that he had over and over and over again, and those children were a version of him that he saw in himself that never stood up to the energy that he needed to stand up to.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of his victims were in bed sleeping when he attacked them, so they're kind of helpless. There's no way for them to really protect themselves, right? So like he would go in and execute them while they were sleeping, and then he would assault the wife, and you know, and then shoot her, and you know, so it's a lot of crimes, and they were so random. There was that they just thought it was total chaos. The police didn't know where he was going next. There was no rhyme or reason about his crimes. It was just pure opportunity, or you know what, maybe he just felt like killing somebody at that time. Random cities, you know, throughout California, throughout LA, but there was no rhyme or reason to it. And one of the things that you were saying about him, you know, having the power, he was known to say, we all have the power to kill in our hands, but some people are afraid to use it. The ones who aren't control life itself. So I felt like he had all the power. And that's what gave him the power, was when he was able to kill somebody.
Well, and if you think about the spiritual, we've talked a lot about the spiritual representation of ending someone's life. It is as though you are trying to steal their life force.
Yeah.
But that action in general of trying to steal something is number one, that you don't even feel worthy of your own life force. Because in order to even want to steal something that isn't yours, like, you know, Eileen Wuornos stole money. She never felt worthy enough for money, right?
Right.
People literally don't feel worthy enough for something, so they feel that they have to take it and cheat the system to take it because they're not worthy enough to get it the right way. And so in a lot of ways, Ramirez felt unworthy of his own life force, unworthy of his own power, unworthy of himself. And so he stole others' life forces in an effort to try to gain his own sense of worth.
Interesting.
And I feel like what we are discovering, at least my experience with a lot of these serial killers, is that their motives are not what it's defined as in paper. It has so much more depth to it, in the sense of like, you know, life versus death, power versus powerlessness. And most of them had complete and total addictions to taking life force, because if they could just have more life force, they would feel more power. And I feel like there's something to be said about that experience. So it would make sense that he would be attracted to things that brought out what he felt gave him power, which was anger. And it's interesting, I feel like the anger, and why he asked the question, why aren't you more angry about your life? He's trying to indicate that anger is where the power comes from. And I feel like that was what he felt in his life. Like, if I'm angry, then I have my power, because he watched countless people before him show anger and show power, like his cousin.
And like his dad to the mom, and the dad to him.
Yeah. And his dad to others too, because his dad really displayed that everywhere, except outside. Never showed it outside. And, you know, what's interesting is it looks as though dad was powerless outside. And I think that's so interesting that I'm seeing it that way, because I feel like Ramirez saw two versions of his dad. He saw his dad weak. And, you know, and it's so interesting because I see it in reverse. Like, so he saw his dad weak, and then behind the scenes, his dad was powerful with his anger, right? Like, so and that comes with shame, because shame is formed in secrecy.
Right.
So the more that, like, you know, his dad would do that, like, oh, at church we act this way, and then like behind closed doors,
right,
we're angry and violent. It's so interesting. He literally saw, well, I'm just going to be angry all the time, and that's going to be powerful. And I feel like he missed the point.
Yeah,
because really, when you are that angry and you're at the whim of something,
right,
you are literally out of control. And when you're out of control like that, you have no freedom,
and you have no power.
Yeah, and you're being controlled by the very emotion that is dominating your experience.
Yeah.
And you're going to continue to like release that. And I feel like that was like, he was invoked. And he's showing me there's somebody that he beat really badly. Like, when I say really badly, and I see a car door opening and I see some words said to me that just invoked my anger. Like, I want to like cringe my teeth together. I want to bite this person. I'm so mad. I feel so much anger towards this person, and it's not the way that they look. It's not what they like, how they were driving. It's what they said to me.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because he was captured because he was trying to carjack a woman, and she refused to give him her car. And then that's what invoked these people to notice what was going on, and then they recognized him, and then the mob then attacked him and beat him and held him till police came.
Interesting.
And that's how he got caught.
No, there's another situation that I'm referencing where he beat somebody senseless, like, and he didn't. This wasn't his capture. This feels like the amount of anger that I have, and it was what was said to me. That's what I remember. Almost like almost like a somebody said no to me, and it's kind of the same, similar thing of like the woman saying no about the carjacking, but it's like somebody said no to me, and I like it's they were holding their power, though. It wasn't like no, you can't take my car. It was like, no, you can't have my power. It was like that kind of energy.
Yeah.
That invoked something inside him of like, I'm gonna show you that, like, so it wasn't necessarily like that everyone had fear of him. It was the way that they reacted to him. Kind of similar to like Eileen Wuornos, where she like would have these reactions to these men who were behaving certain ways. And it was like, it was like she was playing out her father over and over and over again. And it was something they would say that would like set her off. And I feel like it's the same thing with, him. It was the way that they would hold their power that just ignited him in certain ways. And there was like a very, 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 very defeated self that wanted to take out that anger. And he would get a feeling after he would do the crime, like a feeling of like justification, vindication of what he did. And there was like a feeling of like a rush of like, I'm doing what's right. I'm doing what I need to do. I'm taking care of myself. And it felt powerful, but I feel like that was a false sense of power, because immediately afterwards, I still feel weak.
That's interesting. And that's probably why he kept on killing.
And then also I keep seeing him in this stance. He hasn't changed his stance, where he's like got his hands kind of like propping up his
like a chin.
And he's got one arm underneath holding up his hand, and it's kind of like this position of like he's contemplating. And then I also feel like there's this energy beneath it, where he needed to have more self-acceptance and more love for himself. And he didn't know how to do that within the confines of the religion that he was raised in, because he felt that that love was fake, that it was almost
conditional.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because his energy, everything is reversed. So it's like as if looking at the church was looking at Satanism. And looking at Satanism was the church.
It's a church, yeah.
So it's almost like everything was like very backwards, I guess you could say. And there were, I don't feel like there was a disorder. Obviously, the man had a disorder.
Yeah, and he was a drug addict as well.
That's the other thing I was going to say. At the beginning of this, I don't know if we're talking about like what kind of drugs, because like...
He was like LSD, cocaine.
Pothead, hands down, pothead. Like, he, like, the way that I even started this freaking podcast, it was like, everything's great, it's all good. And, like, it was lucid and blah, blah, blah. And I think we had a discussion about, because we're going to be talking about Son of Sam.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he, believed that the neighbor's dog was possessed and like telling him stuff.
Right.
Well, Ramirez, I feel like there was some deity conversations that he had that were warped as well, because there is a spiritualism here. I don't think he's ever talked about that. But I feel like he did have some conversation regarding, like his, how would I talk about this for a second? It's kind of similar to like, so my ex joined the Satanic Temple, and then she, started having all these problems at home, and she started hearing all these voices, and it was a deity claiming to be the goddess of Lilith, and and it freaked her out and everything like that. So I went over there to have conversation with this deity, and the deity was not what she felt it was, but because of her traumas, it was warped in that perspective where it was not empowering and igniting for her in a way of like love. Mm-hmm. It was bringing her into more of like this retribution, or like this like anger and angst that she felt as a result. And there was injustice wounds underneath it, and she was interpreting the deity as telling her something that wasn't true.
Huh.
Like, oh, I misunderstood. You need to do this for me. And I feel like Ramirez had some of that going on, where there was energies that were outer worldly, I guess you could say, mm-hmm. that were attracted into his energy. And there's a lot to be said about that from a holistic standpoint. We have different levels of the astral plane, and based on those different levels of the astral plane, there's different levels of consciousness.
Right.
So when we're sitting at a certain level of consciousness, you have to think about violence in of itself. Violence, the act of it, is at a very low consciousness. In order to enact out violence towards another, you have to be at a low level of understanding, a low level of vibration. Mm-hmm. In the vibration, it's not even, people spend so much time focused on the levels of vibration that they're at. That's not the point. What level of consciousness are you at? Because the level of consciousness is your awareness of your reality that you're in. And when you sit at a low enough level of consciousness at that violent state, you're in a blame state. You're always blaming somebody else for your problems,
right.
Which in essence takes away more of your power, because you are always at the whim of that other person that you've blamed, because that other person has to make a change, and most of them don't.
Right. That's really interesting.
So it goes back to his father wound. And as I talk about that, my breath just feels like it's gone. So I would venture out to say, while his father did visit him in jail,
yeah,
I don't get that was a lovely experience all the time. Because I feel like this little boy with my head down, trying to just do what I'm told. And I think that his parents felt that he had a mistrial, because they couldn't live with the fact that their child had actually did those acts.
Yeah.
It was easier to believe that he couldn't have the possibility of doing that.
I think as a parent, you would definitely think that, because you raise your child. And even though, they have a hard life or they went through things, you still, as a parent, as a mother, think your child is good.
What was confirmed and what wasn't confirmed? Because there is some to this where I don't think he did everything that that they say that he did. I feel like there's some things that he was accused of that were not confirmed, and it's because he didn't actually do them.
Oh, that's fine. Well, it said that he was confirmed of the 13 murders, the 5 attempted murders, the 11 SAs, and the 14 burglaries. But his trial was so hard because he wouldn't talk about what he did, and he wouldn't confirm he did these things. And he never stated why, either. Like, they would ask him, like, why would you do this? Nothing. He never said why. He never gave any kind of explanation. They were trying to get a mistrial because it was such a circus. And then also part of his trial, they used fingerprint technology for like one of the first times because his acts were so random. He didn't care. He left fingerprints. He left bloody footprints. So they were trying to get a lot of that fingerprint technology thrown out of his cases. But I don't know. I mean, that would be a really good question to find out because as of right now, it is confirmed of the 13 murders, the 5 attempted murders, the 11 SAs, and the 14 burglaries. So I'm not sure. But after, and I guess it's hard too, because if he's not confirming he did any of these, could you possibly say maybe he didn't do some of them? But then I guess it's evidence left at the homes that he was in also.
I feel like there was something that wasn't really, like, I feel like it just wasn't, because, like, even as I'm, like, feeling into this, my throat's locking up, which, I mean, would make sense if he wasn't speaking.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's almost, like, this, like, it's laughable. They think that they're going to crucify me anyways.
Yeah.
They think that they know me, but they don't know me. And that's the last power that I get.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a lot here that he was accused of that he didn't actually do. And I know his dental records went into play with that as well.
Because his teeth were really horrendous. Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, especially if there was drug use and things like that as well. Like, and it's so interesting because teeth represent attachments too. So the more issues that you have with your teeth, the more that represents, like money issues and, like I don't want to say anger, but like attachment, karmic attachment meaning you're attached to the lesson and you keep repeating it over and over and over again each lifetime. A lot of times when you have like bad relationships, it shows up on the left side of your meridian within your own teeth. So there's like kind of like a fascination that I have with teeth because teeth, depending on where the pain is and what is going on with your dental health, it indicates what you're attached to. I met a woman who had like 22 active protection orders.
Oh my God.
And her teeth were horrible, mind you. Like, I mean, when I say that, I mean there were holes in her teeth and things like that. And clearly, like, some other things, she wasn't taking care of her dental health. Let's just put it that way. And, but yeah, she had 22 active protection orders in the state of Arizona. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
How do they give you 22 active? Like, wouldn't they put her mental health into play? Like,
yeah, at that point, because it's so much of a victim mentality.
Yeah.
However, every single one, she got at different times and they were justified, and she had a big binder with them in them. And I was just like, wow, what did I do to attract in this energy to have a conversation with them? I'm so fascinated. But it was so interesting. Her teeth were messed up. I think there is I have a fascination with this. Like, the teeth thing plays a role in how much attachment you have.
That's really interesting.
Very fascinating. Okay, so now that we've had some conversation with the conscious level that Ramirez was when he when he was alive, I'm gonna have that energy step back, and then I'm gonna start focusing on calling in, I guess, his higher self, the self that he is after the review that he went through.
So the evolved state. I'm interested to find out how he views his life after that. So I'm wondering if after you tap into his energy, how he's going to feel about not explaining anything that he's done prior, or how he viewed his victims, because I don't think he had any regard for his victims while they were alive.
I will note that as I was tapping out of the consciousness that he was, I got really irritated just now. Really irritated because things aren't showing up the way that I want them to show up. And that was what I was feeling as I was like closing out that energy and like focusing more on the energy that he is now, like after the life review. I do see the reluctancy to go through the light, crossing over. There's a reluctancy to go in front of the review. I feel like he was very afraid of what would happen to him.
Do you think that had to do with his involvement in Satanism? Having that fear of crossing over?
I think it had more to do with being raised in Catholic religion and understanding the belief that, that there was a heaven and there was a hell. I think that he was afraid of dying. And I think that's very interesting because there was a complete fear that just came over me about going in front of the review board. And there was like an indifference and fear.
Interesting.
And after going through the review board, I then wanted to ask, why did you do what you did? And then I get fear. And then I was never understood. And I didn't regard human life and the sanctity of energy.
Yeah.
And how temporary it really is.
Mm-hmm.
I was so fixated on the way everything showed up. And it's so interesting that I'm seeing it that way because, like, when you look at his energy, like, from the outside looking in, at the conscious level that he was at, it's like this feeling of, like, oh, like, he didn't care. But he really did care.
That is interesting. Yeah, because he did have that...
fixated on how it showed up.
Really?
Very fixated on how it showed up and how everyone behaved around him. And he did. He took whatever he wanted to take because he thought that that's how he could get it.
That's really interesting. Because I know when he was on death row and in prison, he just said, you know what, it's not a big deal. Death was always part of the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland. Like, I just feel like he just had even such a disregard for death in itself.
But yet, in his final moments, there's fear.
Maybe he wanted to act like he wasn't so afraid of death, but that's the big thing that he was afraid of.
I think on the outside looking in, he had the appearance of, I don't care. And then in the end, he did care. He did care.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I don't see him surrounded by Satan or, like, surrounded by demons or, like, low vibration, and he's not stuck. Like, he went through the review board, and he is very neutral-minded. His awareness level, he doesn't have a high level of consciousness. When I like interact with him, compared to like Jeffrey Dahmer, this is fucked up, but yeah, compared to like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, we're talking about some really old souls that have new awareness after their life experience. I don't get that from him. I get a lower consciousness than that, like where there's still need to evolve more and need to come back to earth and go through some other earthly experiences.
I wonder
but I do get lifetimes of his where he had suicide, where he left early, he exited early, and it was due to him choosing to exit early, and and that was prior to this experience here on earth that he had. And I feel like he's aware now of how like how the soul works and coming into body suits. However, I feel like he doesn't have the clarity and understanding that's come through multi-lifetime experiences of purposes being fulfilled and new awareness of those purposes. I feel like he doesn't have that same energy, and I don't know how to put that in words. I don't feel evolved to that level.
That kind of makes me sad for his victims in a way. Like, I felt like when we did Dahmer, he had an understanding of what he did to his victims, and when you're saying this, I feel like Ramirez doesn't. He still kind of had like a disregard.
But it all kind of intertwines, doesn't it? The way that he treated his victims, right?
Right.
In the end, it had a ripple effect in each of their lives for their family units, and that was their exit point.
Yeah.
Because from a past life regression standpoint, we choose our exits. We choose when we're leaving, right?
Right.
But then when we're talking about, another human taking that from us, right? Taking our human form from us, that would be a very, very, very sacred contract that's laid out that doesn't necessarily have to be fulfilled either in that way. So just because a person is supposed to exit their life by a carjacking or exit their life by an SA that happens, instead it's this is the blueprint that's there. This will more than likely happen in this way. However, if changes are made, it can change the course of history for that person. For instance, someone choosing to have a child right around 9/11, or someone choosing to not get on the plane that they were supposed to get on because they had a bad feeling and they listened to their intuition that kind of drove them away from that experience.
Yeah.
So I don't look at it from the angle of feeling bad for his victims in that way. I mean, I feel bad for his victims that they went through that.
Yeah.
But I don't look at it from the standpoint of oh, it was meaningless. It wasn't meaningless. It had a purpose. However, I feel like Ramirez has more lifetimes to live, more experiences to be had in a different bodysuit. I feel like there isn't a, he still hasn't evolved further.
Yeah.
And it's not that he's at a low level of consciousness where he's still violent. There's no attachment to human form at this point. It's just, I feel like he's got some other lifetimes to live to understand more about, his experience. John Wayne Gacy. So hear me out.
Yeah.
John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy. They don't have to come back to Earth. That's that kind of level of energy where they've had so many lifetimes prior to that where they are evolved in front of the karmic board. They're different.
Very interesting.
Whereas Ramirez is more of a newer soul. He doesn't really have the same consciousness of those gentlemen that I just spoke of. Now, It doesn't mean that those gentlemen don't have to come back to Earth to experience certain things, because the law of karma very much so, brings into cause and effect. And, when we display certain behaviors, it's showing a certain level of consciousness. So that consciousness then bleeds into what the next lifetime is going to end up resulting in, because there's lessons that need to be learned and understood. And then when you build up certain levels of karma, that builds a dharma level, and that increases, issues that people have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I would be curious to find out what his next lifetime would be like. That'd be really interesting.
Right. It's just, without talking further, I guess, about this in greater detail, it's just the understanding that he has more lifetimes that he has
to live. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would venture out to say a lot of his future lifetimes are going to be through the eyes of the victims.
I was going to say probably.
Also medical issues with his body would be more of a predominant issue. And it's not to say, and I want to stress this to all the listeners out there, I'm not saying that everyone who has medical issues in this lifetime means that they were a serial killer in another, but there is an indication of loss of control of his body where like he would need to have loss of control of his body to understand a whole nother layer of perspective. And the amount of anger that he displayed here in this lifetime, it feels like it's unfinished, like misunderstood, like he needs more experiences to be had to understand that.
It's kind of coming back like with a disability in a way, without being able to like possibly be mobile yourself, you know, depending on other people.
I think it's so incredibly interesting that the recording stopped, you know, when we were in the middle of like talking about what came up. Because when I called in his higher self, who is more evolved, they've already been through the, you know, the review and everything like that. You know, usually I get like a very evolved message. And it's so interesting because when I was talking about Ramirez and I called in his higher self and I was saying, oh man, like he has more lifetimes to be lived, you know,
more lessons
like
to learn. Yeah.
More stuff that needs to happen. Immediately, I got in my head Winston Churchill. And I was like, what does this mean? What does this represent? And I started looking into it. And Winston Churchill was a leader in World War II.
Yes.
He very much so was known for his
leadership and
his amazing words and speeches that profoundly inspired and impacted people in the darkest moments of history. He was like a light, a beacon that brought forth this new understanding for people that helped them move forward in their life and inspired them, you know, at a time when they were weakest. And it's interesting because in Ramirez's life, he definitely had, he was raised in a generation where, again, it's a generation that is coming out of the society norm that was the 1950s mindset. And, you know, like you go to church, you act this way, you behave this way. People were rebelling. They were growing up in these dysfunctional families. They were second to, you know, fifth, sixth generations of dysfunctional family units that had ancestral wounds passed down from each generation. And Ramirez behaving in the way that he did was symbolic for what the generations were really feeling deep down inside about wanting to step out of the norm, wanting to do something different, rebelling against shame.
Yeah.
You know, in the religious construct, and then also from a teenage angst standpoint.
Yeah.
And symbolically, I feel like Winston Churchill coming up in the energy and the fact that I called in Ramirez higher self, I feel like it's all kind of like bringing in this profound, evolved message that that we are constantly influencing others. And we have choices every day based in our experiences that we've processed up until now. And we have choices to either influence people in a negative way or influence them in a loving way. And I feel like in a loving way would be more of that Winston Churchill kind of way where we're inspiring people. We're taking the pain and the darkness that we feel from ourselves, our shadow experience, and we're invoking others to become inspired and to find their light within them, versus choosing the path where we lead by fear.
Right.
And I feel like that's a powerful contrast of energies.
Yeah.
And I think there's a powerful message here in that, you know, we are all on a journey from, you know, start to finish of our lifetime. And as my guides have always said, you know, you are not destined for anything. Your only objective here in this life is to be born into the earth, to breathe air into your lungs,